All right. I think we can start here. Josh and Brian, you guys ready to go?
We
Absolutely.
are.
All right. So thanks everyone for coming, and we'll let them take it from here.
Thanks, everybody. Today is actually the first Document Crunch course that we've done. So we're really happy to be here. And this is about empowering project teams for success. So kind of before we get into the presentation itself, I'm Josh Levy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Document Crunch. Quick background on me. I'm a longtime construction attorney and started my career outside as an outside lawyer representing a lot of builders and contractors, and transitioned in-house several years ago, led a couple of legal departments, and then served in some executive roles in the construction industry before founding Document Crunch. But part of what we'll talk about today is the inspiration for Document Crunch, which is that I've just observed in my time that our industry has a really big problem when it comes to understanding risks in construction contracts and other project documents. A lot of people think about Document Crunch as a tool for people with white collars, back office support, lawyers, risk managers, et cetera. But today is really going to focus on the project teams need to understand these issues, which frankly is the more acute problem that I've observed in my time. We'll talk about why project teams and project managers and operations executives really need to dig into the contract. It's not so much about the catastrophic risks like what happened in my hometown of South Florida this week with a building collapsing. That's not so much what I think about when I think about project managers needing to understand the risks in contracts, which are real. But it's really more about just the day-to-day issues that arise in projects. So I'm super happy to be joined here by Brian Perlberg from Consensus Docs. I'll let him tell a little bit about himself and what his mission is at Consensus Docs, but he's a great friend. And also, Brian, hopefully you'll speak to the partnership that we have between Consensus Docs and Document Crunch as well.
Thanks, Josh. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be part of the first Crunch course as we are here at the summer of 21, and things are feeling more normal and better, and it's good to be with all of you. So thanks for taking time today from your schedules to be a part of this. My name is Brian Perlberg. I am based in the Washington, D.C. area. I am a construction lawyer who specializes in contracts. Consensus Docs is, in essence, my baby from a staffing point of view. I was there at the beginning in the discussions of the idea, and actually was the general counsel at the Design Build Institute of America, and moved over to AGC to then launch the coalition. And Consensus Docs is trying to build a better way. It's sort of our byline. And what that means is the first fundamental thing you do in a construction project is you sign a contract. And we want to have people have a better foundation to build. And historically, hey, you can't say general contractor, you can't say subcontractor without saying the word contract. But usually people don't like their contracts. They usually have them protect one perspective. They're usually written by one perspective. We try to do it a different way, a better way, by getting everyone, and I mean everyone, to the table and have their interests shared and represented, but not focusing on individual interests, but try to figure out a better way to build a project and what's the project's best interest. It didn't seem possible, but it was once we established those rules. And we now have over 100 standard contract documents that are focused on how you can build better with better terms and manage risk to the overall project, rather than stick it to someone in a way which is not balanced. And we did that. We were on the cover of Engineering News Record 13 years ago, and we continue to evolve. And one of the more exciting evolutions that we've done recently is team with Josh and Document Crunch to integrate our standard contract documents, which again focused on not what the risk is necessarily, it's how can we do it better, how can we write it better to empower teams to communicate and collaborate better. And now that language is part of Document Crunch. Is when you look at the samples, you can actually toggle through sample sections of Consensus Docs. We also have, if you're a Consensus Docs user, there are some integrations that we've started in being able to go from Consensus Docs and then go to Document Crunch to look at how the modified documents look. And we are going to be rolling out some other tools like we're going to be talking about that today, but We're going to have the availability of looking at what does consensus docs look under a crunch analysis. So document crunch is really good at telling you what's in the contract and highlighting some issues. The next generation is what's a good or fair term that you should work towards. And consensus docs is a great tool so you can balance the risk and you can say, look, this is not an owner-friendly provision. This is not a contractor provision, friendly provision. This is something that is aligned and has buy-in from all those perspectives. So hopefully I've covered what consensus docs is and how Document Crunch and I are working together. Josh and I have some really good ideas about how can we move the industry, and I think we're going to talk a bunch about that, but how can we move the industry, because that's really both of our mission, is to have better outcomes.
Thanks for that, Brian. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get into, what today's focus is, which again is empowering project teams to understand some of the issues that they need to know about day to day. A couple of housekeeping items. One, we're super collaborative here. You've got two attorneys on this webinar. Feel free to put us on the spot. If you just want to type in your questions in the Q&A, at the end, we'll answer those. Also, I know we've got some great customers on here already. But we're going to overview this new product that we just rolled out today, kind of as a lens through which to look at these issues, which is our project team cheat sheet. As you all know, anybody who signed up for this webinar, we are going to give access, including our customers. We're going to give access to a free project team cheat sheet upload. So you can go about getting that in one of two ways. One, you can email info@documentcrunch.com. Just send an email to them, confirm that you attended this webinar. And if you send them a contract, we can get a cheat sheet uploaded for you free of charge. Or two, we'll have someone follow up with the attendees as well. But anyway, the idea here is we want to show you this awesome new tool that's really supposed to be focused on the people with hard hats managing the day-to-day in the field. And we're going to give it away for free to those who attended this webinar. Also, just kind of similar in that vein, we're also going to do a raffle and give away 10 project team cheat sheets to anybody who posts and tags Document Crunch on LinkedIn about this Crunch course. We'll do a raffle and we'll award somebody 10 free uploads as well. So anyway, that's what we're doing. Again, we appreciate the attendance. So let's get into it. So why do project teams need to know about contracts, right? I kind of started out thinking about this, this picture is telling to me, because you think about the construction industry and you think about people in the field, and we tend to think about, there's this idea of the people in the trenches managing the project every day. And that includes even project managers, superintendents, et cetera. And then there's the back office, the suits, the guys like me who, get hired to look at these pieces of paper and advise on risk and do all that. But what I've learned in working in this industry is the people with hard hats really need to know what's going on at the project level. And why is that? Well, stuff happens on construction projects. This is not an industry where you can just put your contract in a drawer. And so what do I mean by that? If you're at a restaurant and you order some food, you make your order and you see the price of the menu, and generally you order your food, and the food comes out, and then you pay your bill at the end of your time. You're not sitting there saying, the waiter came out a little bit later than I thought he or she would. Let's do a deductive, let's take a deduct off the price. Or the food wasn't as good as I thought it was. So let's, that changes the nature of the transaction. There's a lot of commercial, I'd say, industries and relationships out there where it's very static, right? You kind of make the order and you pay what you knew you were going to pay at the onset. Construction is the opposite. Construction is very dynamic. And again, this isn't so much about the catastrophic risks that may happen, because we know construction's super risky. When I think about this stuff, it's how are project teams managing change on their project? It was raining in Atlanta, my hometown, yesterday, or I should say my current town yesterday. It was raining here. Do you know how many millions of dollars seeped right out of the bottom of projects because rain can delay construction? We all know that on this webinar. But the project teams maybe just don't have the wherewithal around, managing what their rights and entitlements are when it rains, how this stuff works. So we're going to get into, and all of that is grounded in the contract. So stuff happens on construction projects, and frankly, it's the people in the field that need to be managing this. And so in all the trainings that I've done over, with project teams over the course of my career, I always would ask the teams, do you know what our best day in court is? What is our best day in court? And people would look at me like I was nuts. I'm talking PMs and superintendents and whatnot. Our best day in court is never going there. You never want to see this person. Construction is an industry, we have razor thin margins. Those margins are going down. No one makes money when you go to court. And so how do you stay out of court? You stay out of court by empowering project teams to effectuate successful outcomes at the project level when stuff happens. It's one thing when it rained yesterday in Atlanta, and that was one rain day. But what happens when there was 32 rain days? It's the end of the project, and now the owner is looking across the table at the contractor saying, yeah, you didn't really put me on notice properly for those rain days. So yes, I get it that those 32 rain days may have added up to $1.2 million in extended general conditions, but why don't you pound sand? That's when you end up in court, right? That's where guys like Brian and I have made our whole careers, is having to manage those types of outcomes. The best days for construction companies are never getting there. And it starts with the people in the field being empowered and understanding this stuff, so that it's not, hey, we're going to wait till the end of the project, but it rained yesterday in Atlanta. Section 37 clearly entitles me to time and money for a rain day. Section 42 says that I had to put you on notice within 3 days. I did that. Stop messing around, Mr. or Mrs. Owner. Give me the money that I deserve. Give me the schedule relief that I deserve, and let's nip this in the butt and keep going. That's what this is about. And so when I think about our best day in court, it's never getting there. It's preventing fee erosion at the project level so that the project doesn't suffer from death by 1,000 cuts. And that's what this boils down to. That's what this is about for project teams. The issue, though, that we have is that project teams, people in the industry, tend to hate contracts. They're intimidated by them. There's a bunch of legalese and boilerplate. It's fine print. It's antithetical to the, kind of the culture and ethos of the construction industry, which is, we just want to give it hell and get it done and build something meaningful. So that's what this is all about. That's why Document Crunch was founded, because there was a disconnect between the importance of managing the projects at the contract level against the general experience that people in the field have when managing the contract. So it's in response to this that we're really happy to show off our new project team cheat sheet today. I'm going to just quickly go over what this is, and then we'll get into it and start looking at the issues that matter to you all. But the project team cheat sheet is a tool that Document Crunch has created. And I'm assuming most people on this webinar know who Document Crunch is, but just in case, we've used artificial intelligence to highlight the types of business terms, risk issues, et cetera, that I would have looked for and my co-founder would have looked for, who's another longtime construction attorney, if we were reviewing a construction contract. The project team cheat sheet strips away a lot of the legal stuff that the people in hard hats never need to worry about. And I won't bore you with the details of that today. The project team cheat sheet is just supposed to provide easy access to those issues in a contract that matter to project teams. So we'll start here with issues of pertaining to financial management, and we'll talk through some of these terms. But the idea here is, if the issue is found in your contract, we'll identify it here in this third column. You'll be able to click through and see what that issue is. You'll be able to make notes around that issue in this fourth column here. And to the extent that you need context around those issues, context is provided here as well. So the explanation is important, right? Why is managing retainage important in a construction contract? That may be a rhetorical question for some, but you'd be surprised when going back to like this idea of project managers and others not really understanding this stuff. Sometimes that little nudge is really important so that they can understand the context around these issues. And again, like all of our products, yes, you can buy this off the shelf and you'll have, generally the consensus docs and Document Crunch kind of views or policies or whatever it is around some of this stuff, sample language. But this can also be totally customized. So if your organization has its own views or policies or procedures around these issues, this can be embedded into this workflow so that you can understand it. So the cheat sheet is made up of 3 parts. Part A is financial management. Part B is change management. And part C is just issues pertaining to the execution of the project. So this is a simplified, pared down, user-friendly tool for project teams to get to the issues in a contract that they would care about when managing the day-to-day. So that's why we created this. And I'm going to just switch screens here. We're going to go right into Document Crunch now. And we're going to, look at some of these issues and kind of talk through with Brian and I, based on our experience, why some of these issues are important. I'll also offer some war stories so that we're not just talking about academic points here, but I'll tell you some of the experiences that I've had of where these issues have come to bite teams in the butt. And we're happy to then just have a discussion from there. So just give me a second here. Okay, can you all see Brian, can you see my screen? Can you see the cheat sheet here?
I can.
Okay, so here is a real live version of that mock-up cheat sheet that I just showed you. And as you can see here, we found certain algorithms that tie to these issues that we were just going through. I've made just some illustrative notes here that would, emulate how I would either, be reminding a team to think through some things, or that a team may be talking to each other. Retainage provision was left blank. What do we do here? Let's start managing the punch list early to ensure that final payment can be submitted as soon as we have turnover. The idea is that this becomes literally the cheat sheet or the playbook for a project team managing the day-to-day. So when we get into issues, Brian, I think the first one that you wanted to talk about is retainage. So, just by way of example, so retainage, if you wanted to have a little background on retainage, you would click here and you would have, be able to get your own policies and procedures around retainage. But then we're going to jump right into this. And I just went ahead and clicked through here, and we're going to get right to the retainage provision when you click through, which has been highlighted right here. So you can start to see how retainage works on this project. So Brian, why don't you go ahead and speak through what consensus doc says about retainage and why it's important to manage on your projects.
Just a quick background is to make sure everybody's on the same page is we took a consensus docs document and created a cheat sheet, and Josh ran the artificial intelligence crunch analysis of a standard consensus docs unmodified. And there's a benefit of that. And then obviously you really want the contract on your project, which is going to be modified, right? And how extensively a standard document is modified really depends, but they're often very modified, unfortunately, because we want to have some baseline and there's some balances. One of the things that we did with consensus docs is that there's a balancing of interest. I said it before, this is not when you are usually negotiating standard contracts written by one association, or you have a original contract, a bespoke or manuscript contract, it's usually very protective of one perspective, right? And what happens with that is it's out of balance. With retainage, there's a couple things, and I actually appreciated some of the analysis on the take that Document Crunch has and provides a good background on retainage. For retainage for us is when you do an analysis, of course you're going to have retainage, right? So where is it in the contract? What does it say? Document Crunch does a good job of doing a smart index of pinpointing where it is. It doesn't necessarily tell you what your contract says it is. You'd have to do some reading comparison between what the take is or what the standard language is from consensus docs. For consensus docs, we do a couple things. Look, a standard document, we don't have it's a blank. We don't have a 5% or 10%. Some places actually have a statutory provision, but there's a couple things to keep in mind from a background perspective, and you're going to hear me say this more than once today, is payment flow and getting paid timely for the work that you do is the lifeblood of a builder or contractor. And when companies go out of business, it's usually not for lack of work or money coming in. It's that they put too much work out and don't get paid for the work that they've done. So actually, in an improving economy like we're in now, there's actually more risk of subcontractor default and bankruptcy. So be careful of that. Retainage, the value of it is that it protects an owner for not overpaying for work, but sometimes they use it as a means to fund the work, which is not good, and it becomes oppressive. So a couple things that we do that's both in the analysis from DocCrunch and consensus docs is we actually stop withholding retainage when the work is 50% complete. The owner's protected because they have work put in place, and then that helps with payment flow. The other thing is Consensus docs is a family of documents. We have subcontracts, and we write it in a way that our subcontracts, even if you're not using a consensus docs prime agreement, the subcontract kind of kick on some of the more progressive provisions. And if it's allowed, if it's in the prime agreement, you can have early release of retainage to early finishing subcontractors, because subcontractors wait years before they get the release of their retainage. So those are some things. One is retainage stops at 50% of the completion as a balancing act of protecting the owner as well as having payment flow. And then in the subcontracts, we have some progressive provisions that if it's in the prime agreement and retainage is released, you can get some of those early finishing subcontractors their money earlier rather than wait for years. And hopefully by doing that, you get better contracts, giving better pricing, and the payment flow goes a long way for having better relationships on projects.
So Brian, you alluded to payments. So, here we've got, the progress payment requirements and the final payment requirements. So I'll kind of click through just so you can talk through some of that as well. But, again, the idea being when you look at some of Brian's terms, I made some comments into the cheat sheet here because, there's ways that a team could optimize managing through the payments. So like to Brian's point, this idea about, retainage being released a little bit early on a project, perhaps if you're a subcontractor and, and you're on this cheat sheet, knowing that mechanism exists could change how you even price the project, because we know so many subs go into this, thinking that they're not going to be paid retainage till the end of the job. So I'm going to just click through generally to the final payment terms. I'm going to scroll through, Brian, while you just talk about payment. But here's, where the final payment, requirements are. And then what I'll do is I'll go, kind of up to the progress payments as well. Actually, I'll go back because I'm not sure exactly where that is here. So I'll go back to the progress payment terms as well.
So I'll say it this way, big picture is that the contract's really important, but sometimes the devil is in contract administration, and that's what we're getting at today. And there'll be terms in here about when you hit substantial completion, right? Does the work, did it meet the contract documents? Some of that is what's a reasonable person say, and there's gray in that, right? And a couple things I will say is that if I had to choose sometimes between having the best teams and the worst contracts, or the worst contract and the best teams, I'd probably choose the best teams and the worst contract. But that's not the way the world works. Usually the best teams create the best contracts because because they're reasonable. When you are dealing with things like progress payments, and if you've hit substantial completion, or if the work meets the requirements, there's a reasonableness to this. When we talk about progress payments or final completion, we can talk about the forms that you use, but some of it is what are the people who are in the position of making decisions. So some of that is making sure that that has to be done and making sure that you document it. One thing I will say is really important with consensus docs is that we have fair terms with our progress payments and how much time elapses. For the owner, there's a 21-day period, and those are calendar days for paying the work. And if they don't pay, they have to have an articulated reason. And then again, where the subcontracts were really fair, the turnaround time is only 7 days. A lot of parties, they have to factor in a lot of costs because of slow payment. It's really a problem, and you all know that. So getting the right terms in your contracts and knowing what those are, and then administering your contract in alignment of those terms rather than let things slide, are all really important for the project teams to keep in mind.
Yeah, let me actually just tell a quick war story around that point. And in some ways, we're not doing ourselves a service because we're using Brian's contract, which I will readily concede is a very fair form contract. That's why we partner with Document Crunch to provide that, kind of example of what is, an equitable contract. But you see here in the payment provision, and this is why teams need to know this stuff. You see here in the payment provision that applications of payment need to be supported by a schedule of values based on a percentage complete basis. Okay, that seems innocuous enough. I have seen owners hold up payment because a contractor did not turn in that schedule of values, right? And again, this is a very fair, straightforward standard, but you could start to see how the requirements of what you need to do to get payment could become more onerous. I'm sure folks on this call have worked with contractors or owners that may have, more stringent standards. So you start to think about cash flow and how important that is for a construction project. I've seen payment provisions that say, and if you don't get paid, by the first day of the month because you didn't get your payment application properly approved, it's a 30-day delay until we process the next one. So now you're talking about a contractor or potentially a subcontractor that now went from a 30-day payment term to a 60-day payment term because they weren't, owning the schedule of values, percentage completion portion of the payment. So, you start to think about like, why is this important? Because if the teams don't do it, it creates leverage for the owner to do that. Or you think about, well, there may be a change order that's outstanding, but the contractor hasn't, done what they're supposed to do on the applications for payment. I've seen an owner say, well, we're going to withhold payment now. And a contractor says, well, you haven't done that before. They said, well, we're starting to now. So do you want to settle up on this change order and we won't withhold payment or not? So you could see how some of these things you want to cross your I's or cross your T's and dot your I's. So that's why payment and these provisions are so important related to, what you need to do to get paid, both at the progress level and at the final payment level, and how retainage also may, play into some of this as well. So I'm going to go to the next issue now in financial management. This is one that's near and dear to my heart. So this is the audit framework. So in Brian's contract, and you can see my comment here, remember, there aren't audit rights per se, but we do have to keep costs back up and need subs to do the same. So I'm going to just go right into here and we'll look at the audit provision here. This is near and dear to my heart. I'll tell you all a story about why this stuff is important. I had a situation back when I was in private practice, right? A contractor, general contractor client. They built 3 elementary schools for one school system. I won't tell you who the client was. I won't tell you who the school system was, but they built 3 elementary schools for one school system. All 3 schools were completed on time, within budget. All 3 schools were financially successful projects for my client. 2 years after completion, we got a letter from an auditor who was working for the school system. This is 2 years after completion, that we had misappropriated and improperly billed them for $3 million worth of change. And the project team was beside themselves. They couldn't understand what they were talking about. And they recalled, and what was referenced was situations where on an active elementary school, the principal of the school would come out and say, hey, you're getting a little bit too close to my playground as you're rebuilding this cafeteria, or you're building this cafeteria. Do you mind rerouting the walkways, a little bit further away, because we've got kindergartners out here playing and you're jackhammering and stuff's flying around or whatever it is. So the team obliged and did that and submitted the costs, and the principal approved the costs, and the amounts were paid to my client. But the audit provisions of the contract gave the auditor the right to claw back any monies that were inappropriately billed for. And in this particular instance, and this is a double whammy because we're going to talk about changes a little bit later, but in this particular instance, the school board's rules were expressed and those were in the contracts. Any changes over $25,000 needed to actually be approved by the school board, not the principal of the school, but the school board. And here you had a situation where all project stakeholders, the project team, the principal, the staff overseeing the project, were all thrilled with the way that the contractor was working. But because the team allowed the principal to direct changes, and because the team was subject to this audit clause, the school board made a multi-million-dollar claim back to the school, back against the contractor. You could see how terrible that could be for anybody working under those types of clauses. So having the wherewithal around these clauses, whether it's knowing that there's an audit clause, so you need to maintain cost backup or require that your subs maintain cost backup, or the change order provisions, which Brian's going to get into a little bit later as well, having wherewithal around those issues, it's not just a white collar back office thing. That's a project team thing, because in real time, you had the principal walking out on an active site and directing changes in the work. And that principal was without authority to do so, even though, it was a legitimate ask. At that time, the appropriate thing would have been, we get it. we can certainly stop construction, but we cannot make this change without getting the appropriate authority from the ownership group, which was all in the contract. So kind of in a similar vein, I'm going to go to the next provision that's near and dear to my heart, which is the notice requirements in a contract. So we find here notices, not just when notices must be sent, but where and how to send. And I'll just kind of quickly talk through some of this as well. I cannot tell you how many projects I have been a part of where the notice provisions have been loosely administered by projects. And at the end of the project, going back to that rain example that I gave earlier, you start to see a situation where a contractor thinks they have millions of dollars of entitlements around legitimate changes or delays that were, or excusable events of delay under the contract, weather, owner-driven changes, design issues in the contract documents, et cetera. I cannot tell you how many times I've had an owner say, yeah, our notice provision says that if you don't give notice within X amount of time and that says these magic words, you've waived claims. So we get it. This happened. But why don't we settle for 10 cents on the dollar as opposed to the full entitlement? So this is pretty, I think, self-explanatory, but this is a huge issue because project teams that do not manage the notice provisions appropriately lose leverage every single day. They lose leverage because this stuff doesn't tend to get treated kindly when you're looking at it, kind of in the past, and you have this overwhelming body of claims that need to be settled up, but the project team's not lily white on how they gave notice. So notice requirements, incredibly important. I'll go through just one more in the change management front, and I'll tell you another war story. So hazardous materials, right? What do you do if you encounter unforeseen or hazardous materials on the project? And so here's, some provisions in and around hazardous materials and who's responsible. Why is this important to a project team? I've had a situation on a project where an owner's asked a superintendent to sign waste manifests. Because the owner was removing and abating some asbestos on a project. Later on, the EPA came in and opened a criminal investigation under one of the federal acts against my client. And we were at least accused of being the generator. Why were we accused of being the generator? Because the superintendent was signing waste manifests that said, contractor is the one who's responsible for this waste, even though the owner was just asking us to do a favor to help kind of as that on-site presence. So, having wherewithal around the hazardous materials section of your contract. What do you do if you encounter them? Are you required to help facilitate removal or abatement? These are all critical issues. And so while we're on the topic of just change management, Brian, I think you were going to just talk about generally, wherewithal around knowing what's covered, what's considered maybe an excusable event of delay, which is in here as well. And why don't you just talk through some of the types of issues that are important to you?
Well, and I just wanted to highlight, I want to backtrack a quick second on the audit rights, because when we were preparing for today's webinar, I usually go by the Consensus Docs 200, which is our design bid build lump sum agreement that is between an owner and a general contractor. And the way we do it, which is more integrated and clearer, is that we put our terms and conditions and the agreement in one contract, and another standard contract document, or others don't do it that way, right? So people are a little bit more used to the separate, but there's a lot of advantages. And when you're doing a crunch, it's nice to have it as one document. Now for the 200, there is no audit provision, and the crunch said no specifications for that provision. But for the 500, and Josh, I think you're showing the folks today our CM at risk agreement, which is a cost of the work agreement with the GMP. There is an audit provision, and the crunch tells you where it is, and you can have notes about this. One of the things where we need to get to as an industry, and it's in that notes section, is why the heck are you doing if you have a lump sum agreement? And I still believe that is the most prevalent project delivery method contract in the industry. Why are you doing audit rights if it's a fixed firm fee, if it's a lump sum agreement, right? Like, those are the questions that we need to make sure that we ask ourselves. Now, switching a bit.
Hey, Brian, but to that point, I mean, that's what this context section is about, in and around these issues, right? The idea would be, whether document crunch off the shelf says it, or ultimately you program it this way. The idea would be it's not acceptable to have an audit provision if you're doing lump sum work, right? And for the subcontractors on the phone or on this call, you may want to consider that too. But the idea would be now in this section here, where you can click through to get more information or helpful hints and best practices around these issues. Yes, you should not have an audit provision in a lump sum contract, to Brian's point. So some of that wherewithal is, in and around that. So same thing with the hazardous materials section. To be able to have context around, if you encounter hazardous materials and it's not your responsibility under the contract, do not sign anything on behalf of the owner under any circumstances. Those are the types of, that's the type of context that we're trying to instill in and around project teams. Because if, Jenny, the project manager, is new to the company, she may not appreciate that that's the company's policy. She may have done it differently at her last job. She may have never encountered hazardous materials before and been construing that all important project, related contract term for the first time. So the idea is not just to spot the issues, but to provide wherewithal around those issues. And then once you've spotted issues, you provide wherewithal around the issues. This note section is really like, okay, so then how do we mitigate this? What's our strategy? What's the team's action item, when you come up with this stuff? And so that's how this is supposed to work. And that's what this is really about. So sorry, Brian, I know you were going to go into changes.
No. Well, I'll just piggyback a little bit on hazardous materials, which we didn't plan on me talking about, but just to your point is two things. One is from a big picture perspective. I feel like people don't want to deal with the contracts is because you can't, when construction attorneys usually are talking to the project teams, they make it sound like you have to do everything and you have to do everything perfectly, right? You ever have a conversation, like say you're dealing with your kids and I'm like, focus, right? So part of the cheat sheet here that we're talking about today is a little focus on making sure that your teams are focused on the right issues that they're supposed to be dealing with. And one of the things that I always talk about with consensus docs is I want you to use it whole cloth, but there's also an evolution, and maybe you focus in and prioritize certain provisions like the hazardous materials or the change order provisions or the time for payment. Some of this you kind of pick and choose, and some of this cheat sheet is helping you focus and prioritize. Maybe you're not negotiating every term in the contract because you don't have a lot of leverage, but maybe you're doing your top 5 or your top 10, which is what I recommend. With the hazardous materials, the contract makes it really clear that the general contractor's not, or the contractor is not allowed to bring hazardous materials unless it's disclosed in the contract documents. So then, if you're using a better contract, and it also says, if there is hazardous materials, we updated our documents 5 years ago and it said like, we've always had the get direction from the owner. That's been very clear. And now we have we have a form with a change directive to make it clear to get that instructions. Moving to change orders, I'll tell you this is some of the worst horror stories that I get that make some of this, like Josh is saying, it makes your blood want to boil, is I hear people get messed up on change orders a lot. And things that were informal, when it times to formalize, all of a sudden that authority and the informal discussions is hard to prove. One thing we do in our contracts that I think is good is even though it's in the 200, it is a lump sum. We have a really extensive actually cost of the work similar to what's in the 500, because if you're going to do a change order, it's usually on a cost of the work basis with overhead and profit established. Better to get that done up front. One topic that's been really big in people looking at their contracts since COVID hit is section 6.3 with the basically your extensions for time or money potentially for delays. We have a really good, we get a lot of the issues out in the day, we get them right. And one of them is, it specifically says, and we got a lot of plaudits that we specifically had epidemics. Our excuse for equitable adjustment for time and potentially money is very detailed. Other contracts are very vague in this regard. We have a catch-all, anything beyond the control of the constructor, which is what we call our general contractor. We call it constructor because that's someone who adds value and is a professional. We also break down when you get just time or when you get time and money. And sections A through D in section 6.3 will specify things where not only was it beyond your control, but we had a lot of discussions about, well, look, if it's really more on the owner side, and I believe that includes delays related to hazardous waste that are more on the owner is usually the one who has hazardous waste on the material. There is the potential of getting adjustment, not just for time, but money too. But if you looked at, I've done whole webinars on this section and how it played out with COVID. We had adverse governmental actions is a reason. We had epidemics, right? We had the transportation, which is also something. There were a lot of ways that this extensive catch-all, but with specifics, was helpful in directing the teams to communicate on something that really was not anticipated 2 years ago.
So, and again, let me just add a quick war story to this. 6.3.2 here, Brian's very generously added time and money relief for certain events of delay, up here. I can't tell you how many project teams have come to me after executing a change order where they have given up right to be compensated for these types of things, even when they have that right. And it's simply just the owner put a piece of paper in front of me. I thought it was a good deal, so I signed it. Well, that was profit. That was cost right out of the bottom of our project. And so, again, having teams have a lot of wherewithal around what do you just get time for? What do you get time and money for? What's considered an event of delay? What's not considered an event of delay? It's also a function of, again, going back to this whole leverage thing, not making bad asks to owners or subs, not making a bad ask to a contractor. Right? Having a team that's on top of this stuff, that understands what its rights and remedies are, not over asking, not under asking. All of this adds up to what I'll call a professional leverage that you begin to develop so that when you do make that claim, that person that you're making that claim to understands that you understand, and they understand that you're not going to be a pushover about it. And that's how you keep fee in projects versus just a team unknowingly just taking just a little bit of time, a little bit of schedule relief because, look, we're going to finish early anyway. What's the difference? Well, the difference is you just gave up all the costs reimbursement for your people during that period of delay. If you were to accept a time only event when you were entitled to time and money. And again, going back to this idea of razor thin margins, those types of follies, which happen every day, I witness it every day, those add up across an enterprise. Those add up across a project, but then they multiply even more across several projects or numerous projects or across an entire company. And you tend to see these kind of hot spots where you have this fee erosion across just, different parts of an enterprise. And generally what it boils down to is not the team was incompetent to construct and execute the project. It's that the team wasn't administering their contract to the full benefit that they were entitled to. So it starts, like Brian said, with you hope that you get a fair contract. But even if you don't have a great contract, having a strategy around managing that contract day to day is everything. That's what this is about. So we're going to just go to just 2 more provisions, and then we have some questions here. So happy to do that. So I'll be real quick on this, but confidentiality requirements. I'll just tell a war story here about confidentiality. I cannot tell you how many projects. I've had a couple of projects where I've had subcontractors that have been terminated from the project because they were tweeting pictures of the project where there was a big fat confidentiality provision in the contract. And certain owners on certain proprietary projects can get very touchy about that. So what does that add up to for you all? Your teams need to be managing this every day. Your teams need to be communicating this to subs, to each other, whatever it is, to the new project engineer that's reporting to duty, understanding that there's a confidentiality clause. And what that says is something that needs to be managed by the project level. There's no way for that to be enforced anywhere other than, in the trailer. And the reality is that these things get violated every day. And that's a really bad way to form a relationship with whoever you're working for when you get that phone call that the confidentiality provision's been breached. And I think, Brian, the last one we're going to talk to, and I'd like to get into some questions, is order of precedence. So do you want to maybe just bring it home with why the order of precedence provision is important for a project team. And then we can, again, just talk through just some general key takeaways and answer the couple questions that we had out there.
Sure. So again, piggybacking off a little on Josh, I wanted to make one point. One of the things that I particularly take pride in consensus docs is how the documents are drafted. And I think if you just read through a consensus docs, they don't have a lot of legalese. They're written to be understood. And I would caution everybody when you're working on your contracts is to, a good legal writing is good writing. And I take a lot of pride in where we are in that regard, and hope that's one of the reasons why you don't see our contracts wind up in litigation like you see other contracts based upon our usage. We have a really good track record of people using our contracts and not winding up in court. One of the ways that you can not wind up in court is to have an order of precedence clause. And what I mean by that is other standard contract documents do not. They're silent on order of precedence clause because they want the owner or probably the design professional to play God, basically. They have a different golden rule. And the golden rule is, without an order of precedence clause, is that those who has the gold makes all the rules, right? And so we have an order of precedence clause where your latest thinking basically trumps things that were done in the beginning of the project. So obviously the agreement is going to be high in the order of precedence. But for instance, generally a change order, what's in there is your latest thinking. It's going to have a higher precedential value. But here's the thing with the order of precedence clauses. People spend millions of dollars and time in litigation because construction is messy. And sometimes there's things that are fuzzy and you're looking at 2 different documents or 3 different documents. And what do they mean? If you go to court to spend millions of dollars trying to determine which document has precedence over others, to me, that is really inefficient. If you can kind of come up with a system that everybody agrees with ahead of time, I do think ours is better of specifying the documents, having the ones that are later, specifying which ones are contract documents. People do get caught up in they give it for information, but you can't rely upon it, which I don't love. There's another point to that as well from an owner's perspective. But the bottom line here is, even if you don't like our order of precedence clause, or you don't like, just put something down so you can avoid millions of dollars going to waste litigating which documents control over the other.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Brian. I just wanted to show one other feature here of this tool. Look, we give a list of the issues that we at Document Crunch think are really important for project teams, but we also leave this free flow section here at the end so that the team can add in any other clauses that they may, think are important. So, one thing Brian and I were talking about yesterday were tariffs and price escalation. So we added in something that there was no tariff clause. We need to make sure we manage this risk with subs bidding the jobs, right? Owners requiring we obtain parking passes on the north lot. So again, just a way for you all to add any catch-alls to this cheat sheet, which otherwise can be totally shared with anybody in your organization through our simple sharing feature. I'm going to just switch screens again for a second here so we can kind of go back to our presentation. We've got several questions, so we'll try and answer some of them too with the time that we have left. But give me a second here. So the key takeaways are that contracts matter. That's it. Contracts matter. They matter for the people in the back office and they matter for the people in the field. But for the people in the field, that's what I've got on the right there. You all are the first line of defense and enforcers and administrators of those contracts. So when I think about, and this is all I've done my whole career, I think about enterprise risk. It's those people in the field that are who we need to rely upon so that things don't spin out of control, so that things do get properly managed, and frankly, so that fee stays in our projects. We need to protect the profit in our projects. That doesn't mean that you should, get entitlement to things that you're not entitled for, but you should definitely get entitlement to things that you're entitled for. And if you don't, you're likely having fee erosion on your projects. And I think all of us in the industry can agree that we're not exactly working in the most robust industry when it comes to profits. So managing this stuff at the project level is really important. So I'm going to open it up to questions now, Kyle. I think you have some questions you just pinged me about that you've got from the group,
Yes, we
and
do.
and let's open it up and we'll bring it home.
Sure. So the first question we have is, do you have different versions of this that are targeted for underwriters' use instead of contractors? I guess that's a question for Josh.
Yeah, great question. So the short answer is yes. Our off-the-shelf product that we're showing you is more focused on contractors and subcontractors, but we work with underwriters as well. And again, this can be totally modified and customized for the end user's own preferences, policies, issues, et cetera. So we've got some underwriters that are using similar tools, with their own criteria in here.
Great. And then here's the next one. I think it's going to be for Josh too. And the question is, how are the rights and steps to take communicated / administered within Document Crunch to the project manager / team when stuff happens? Is all that supposed to be understood by the project manager prior to construction? Or is there an AI algorithm within Document Crunch that notifies the project manager of what to do upon the occurrence of the event?
That's a great question. So I think of Document Crunch and this project team cheat sheet as really analogous. I'm a big sports fan. I think this is analogous to an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator that you see pacing the sidelines in a football game, holding their playbook, right, and calling plays, right. No one tells them that they need to call a play. They're observing the game and calling plays based on what they see. So the idea here is, and a lot of times that playbook's based on certain situations, right? If you're in third and short, this is the group of plays that we call. If you're in, first and long, this is the group of plays that we call. So the idea, and that's a great question, is we're not going to replace a human, not on the review of what's going on and not on the observation of what's going on. We're merely an augment and a supplement. So you know that you have this tool, and when something happens, we bring you right to, hey, if you encounter subsurface conditions, click here. Hey, if you're about to make a claim, these are your notice requirements. So the idea for that question is, it's your playbook to manage, but you still need to do the work of a PM, which is understand what's going on your project and utilize this tool to augment your response or your reaction or your management of those issues.
Great. And then one more question is, this goes back to the school board story you're talking about. What was the outcome of the school board claim? Because the principal demonstrated apparent authority to make the changes.
Well, that sounds like a very legal question. So I think whoever's answering that or whoever's asking that must be a practitioner. So the long story is that case settled amicably. The bigger answer is that the contract was pretty clear that the principal did not have authority. So there was not apparent authority there. There was a pretty clear contractual standard. As you know, apparent authority needs to be reasonable. And in this particular case, I'm not sure it would be reasonable that a team with a big fat clause in their contract took that apparent authority on. So that's what happened there. Any other
yes,
questions?
We have a question for Brian in Consensus Docs. Somebody wants to know, what are the options for subscribing to Consensus Docs and what does pricing look like?
Sure. So there are many packages. If you go to consensusdocs.org, you can actually look at samples for free. If you are going to use the contracts on a project, we use a Microsoft Word compatible system where you can download the contracts and you only need to come back to us to get rid of the draft watermark. Our packages includes for consultants. We have one that's just for the subcontracts. We have one that's oriented towards design build. And the most popular one is the one that is for in our entire package, because that is the best value. And that is unlimited use on a yearly basis. And if you are a member of one of the 41 organizations that are now part of the coalition, the Consensus Docs Coalition, you get member rates, which is a 20% discount. And with the strategic partnership with Document Crunch is, I believe that we have the same discount or a discount for Document Crunch users. And so I think that's DC. It's in the system. It's either like DC 10 or DC 20 or something of that nature is the promo code.
Awesome.
If there's any others, we have time for maybe one more.
Yes, and there is one more. Perfect. So question here is, what are Document Crunch's confidentiality obligations to its user subscribers? The uploads are, by and large, draft contracts reflecting commercial terms and other sensitive business information. It seems like Document Crunch learns from documents, but are they shared?
Great question. And the answer is we maintain full confidentiality with all of our customers. We don't share any customers' identifying information or business terms or anything like that. We don't sell them. So everything remains totally confidential. Obviously, this is an AI platform, and part of the benefit to our users is that we keep getting smarter and smarter over time. So we do use anonymized data to better ourselves, and users, when they use us, are opting into that. But it's spelled out pretty clearly in the terms of our use that we've got some pretty stringent confidentiality requirements. So we've got hundreds of users at this point, and all of them have their own unique portal and experience with us. And they're not, their information is not being shared with others. So hopefully that answers the question.
Let me see if there's any more. Okay, yeah, we got.
Go ahead, I see one here where it's sort of a question, but more comment. Maybe let me just try to, someone was talking about the change orders, and the question is that is doing a change order. My point was that many change orders, even in a lump sum, the change order is then handled as a cost of the work agreement. And the person was saying that that's often what is getting audited. And I don't know if that's a question, it's maybe more of a comment, but I would agree that's why there's so much discrepancy with change orders, or one of the reasons. So getting that done up front and how you're going to pay for a change order is something that if you can put it in your contract up front is a good thing.
So it looks like we've got a slurry of other questions coming in. So I'm happy to keep this open. If you have an outstanding question, we'll answer them, but I'll also let those who were up against the hour that want to go maybe grab lunch or go on to their next order of business go. Just remember that everybody attending this Crunch course today does have the right to a free project team cheat sheet. Either send an email to info@documentcrunch.com or there'll be some follow-up from the Document Crunch team. But if you have an outstanding question, you want me to answer it, I'm happy to just walk through some of the other open ones. We really appreciate you all attending. Hopefully you got some value out of this. And just remember, it's those folks in the field that are the first line of defense and the administrators of your rights. So having wherewithal around the contract for those people, whether you're one of those people or you're a leader of those people, making sure that those people are equipped to manage the contract is imperative. We think we've got a great tool here that can help augment that process and make it more efficient. So thanks again for your time. And we'll be doing some other Crunch courses here on some other areas of project admin and contract risk in the coming months. So stay tuned for more. Thank you all. So let's see, when the notices are supposed to be sent to different parties, how is Document Crunch alerting the project team members? So that goes back to the question that I think someone else had asked. We're not an automated notice platform. We're not trying to take project management out of the project manager's hands. But by setting yourselves up through Document Crunch and having this tool available to you, you've got your playbook that you know where to go to. So that's how this works. I've got another one here. Who is the main target for Document Crunch? Do you see this as a product for small to large contractors that's all encompassing in its applications, or is there a specific niche the product fits? This is a tool that mainly is supposed to be used to people who are building stuff and or who have any execution risk, like underwriters. Someone asked about underwriters. So the idea here is that everybody who has a stake in the successful outcome of a project or execution of the project likely has some rights tied up in the contract, and being able to have transparency into those rights and risks, understand them and manage them. That's what this is about. So I would say our target market, we mostly have most of our users are contractors and subcontractors, both big and small. And a lot of folks that don't have in-house legal departments or risk management departments, or don't want to spend all the money, having someone review every piece of paper that comes in, are now using us to help negotiate contracts. We didn't really get into that aspect of Document Crunch today, but then everybody, all those users are having teams in the field who are now using tools like the cheat sheet that we had to help administer projects. So anybody that has any stake in project execution success would be a great beneficiary of this technology and this solution that we're offering. I think that was probably the last question. So we'll officially call it closed. Thanks for the numerous folks who stayed on for overtime. If anybody has any questions, you can reach. Excuse me here. Sorry. You can reach me and Brian at these at these addresses, and we'll definitely disseminate this presentation as well. So thanks again for the time, and hope to see you all soon. Take care.
Yes, and the recording of this webinar will be posted on the on Document Crunch's website too, so it'll be up there maybe in a day or two.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone.